Alright, hello everybody to another Q&A here on Military Aviation History. I'm of course Bismarck, and with me today I have Bernhard from Military History Visualized. For some reason that will become very obvious to you guys in some time, we have found ourselves once again in the same place working on a couple of projects, which announcement is still pending, but it will be pretty awesome. Anyway, I've got a lot of questions here from my Patreons, so I thought I'd go through them, also get input from Bernhard on some of them, and he's actually also been very nice to us today because he's giving us access to his camera, which is a lot better than mine.
And audio.
And audio equipment, which is pretty awesome. So this should be the best video on the channel so far, and in the near future probably as well. Anyway, let's get started. And Brandon A asks, which favorite neutral air force I have during World War II, which means that essentially the pool of air forces we have is extremely small. And my answer to that is, well, I made a video about both of them, essentially Sweden and Switzerland, and I kind of like the story of both of them, although I think Sweden is a little bit more unique in the sense that they actually had their own sort of aircraft development as well, whereas the Swiss went initially with German equipment, of course, and also they had French equipment and so on. But that's kind of an interesting topic in itself, neutral nations during World War II. And have you dabbled into this before?
Neutral?
Neutral?
No, why should I talk about neutral stuff? I mean, I talk mostly about like that in some cases they were not neutral, like the United States, like for instance, but I think neutral. No, I might talk, which is planned about a minor axis, which I call a minor axis, like Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Finland to a certain degree. Those are more or less on the list already.
Yeah.
Got a new book, but I mean, I had actually at one point planned a video on Sweden, but I wasn't too happy with the article I read, or there was a lot of internal politics in there in the article. I was like, I need to double check this, so I'm not entirely sure of this. So I skipped it, I think, at that point,
Yeah, that's the problem with some of these nations. It's extremely hard finding good data because most of the stuff that is out there is written in their own language and hasn't really been published in the English-speaking world and the German-speaking world. Well, with Switzerland there is a little bit of that, but
I think the article was good, but the problem was like internal, like the different parties within Sweden, what they went for and other stuff. It was like, then you have to get a lot into details or you don't have much to talk about at all. So it's sometimes like complexity reduction, where to start and where to stop. Because like if you talk about for instance, if you talk about Spain, then it's pretty simple because you have the Franco and more or less everyone knows a bit what you're talking. When you're talking about Sweden, which party? If you're not from Sweden, it's like, there were Swedes and that's it. So you have to establish way more ground rules and look it up, and then it gets more like, I think, more boring.
Yeah. Swedish Air Force might be, the Spanish Air Force might be interesting for me at some point, but we'll get to that eventually.
You have also some footage, I think, from Schleißheim.
Yeah, I do.
I too.
Yeah. And, okay, Dave asks, despite not really existing outside some well-staged publicity photos of Heinkel 100s in 1940, the Heinkel 113 was treated by the Allies as a real frontline aircraft. Are there any other Phantom aircraft like this that were considered real enough to be operational by opposing forces? World War II, what comes to mind might be the Bf 209, but beyond that, I think most nations generally knew what the opposing force had and what they didn't. With the Heinkel 113, this really was sort of a propaganda coup, maybe one of the best propaganda coups that the Luftwaffe or the Germans had in that sense. They essentially pretended like they had a new fighter, a high altitude fighter. And
during the war or before the war?
During the war. So this came out of the Heinkel 100. I made a video about that. And then essentially the propaganda ministry tried to publish pictures of these Heinkel 100s, designating them as Heinkel 113s and saying this is our new high altitude interceptor. We're using them against the Allies. They're amazing, they're super fast, and so on and so forth. And they actually did appear in the official sort of recognition manuals of the Allies as well. But like their actual service was a couple of sorties at best.
I mean, the most interesting aspect, which Justin mentioned at one point, that about the Zero, at one point they assumed it was a push-pull fighter.
Yeah, that was...
So there's some weird stuff out there probably, and it also depends on at which time you look, but I don't know any other Phantom aircraft. I mean, there's one Phantom artillery to a certain degree, what the Germans thought about the Soviets or something.
Yeah.
But that was more on, I think, on the soldier level, not on the intelligence level.
That's the other aspect. Sometimes you have, the soldiers thinking they see one thing, but then the intelligence people saying, no, that thing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And every time a new sort of weapon was introduced, you see this happening. When the Germans introduced the Focke-Wulf 190, the reports the RAF gets from its pilots are widely conflicting. Some say this is a new version of the 109, others say this is completely new aircraft, others go back to, you know, some older designs that they might have seen at some point, and it really gets confusing very fast when you're actually a soldier taking, you know, fire or fighting against these machines. You only see them for a couple of split seconds.
Yeah, and you're on a bit of an emotional episode to a certain degree, so...
Definitely. Okay, Hansaplast wants to know, can I make a video about a swordfish? This plane took him by surprise, since in World War II it was outclassed and outdated and still managed to sink a lot of ships. For example, the Bismarck. Well, it didn't sink the Bismarck, but it hit the Bismarck. Taranto raid, it did well. You made a video about the Taranto raid and the Bismarck mission of the swordfishes. And what's your opinion on sort of this idea that it was outclassed, outdated?
I think it was introduced in 1936 or something, right? It was rather late, because it looked, the thing, it looks like a World War I plane.
It does,
but
it's not.
It's not. That's the issue, and you have to compare it with contemporary planes. I mean, at that point there was a lot of development going on. I'm not particularly good with planes in that regard. And the other thing is, it was for aircraft carriers. Yeah. And it had the benefits because it was so rather slow, because this is the thing, I think I could never find it out. Everywhere it was written it was capable of night operations. But I couldn't find back then during Taranto, and I think only during Taranto, because for the Bismarck I think I didn't need to research this, but I couldn't find out why. Because there's some assume it's because she was rather slow, but it could also be because radar. But in 1940, I think they didn't have radar on them.
Not yet.
So
that was later on.
So here was the problem. Several sources noted, okay, it was night capable, but not why.
Well, night capable essentially means that you also have the instruments that you need to essentially navigate without being able to see anything.
Okay.
Right?
But you think night combat ready or something even. I mean, and the thing is, landing and starting from a carrier at night, I think starting is probably less of an issue, but landing
is a little bit of an issue, yeah.
I think they started during the night and landed during the morning, I assume, for Taranto,
The thing is with the swordfish and any of these sort of designs that come from the interwar period and somehow did well in World War II is you always have to look at the context of the engagement, because... Go on.
I actually remember something. I mean, there's this one issue with the swordfish, why they weren't destroyed to a certain degree to the Bismarck. There are different accounts for this, or possibilities. For instance, since it was mostly canvas plane, that the shots went through, it would have exploded on contact with a metal plane. And I know from my kamikaze videos actually that late war trainer planes from the Japanese, they were also low tech. The US Navy, US Navy gunners, not soldiers, reported also that the shots passed through mostly, and they had also problems with radar. So I think there were a few instances where they did nighttime kamikaze attacks, where they actually sank one destroyer and damaged another heavily with just a few planes, so that the low tech, that the VT fuse, the variable time fuse, which was basically a proximity fuse, wouldn't work properly because it exploded too late or not at all. And other issues. So in some cases that the low tech actually, like also with there's some accounts for the fire control system of the Bismarck that it was made for faster planes. Because you always have, like, for the fire control systems, you have
then again they did hit the swordfishes.
Range.
They did hit the swordfishes, like you said, and the shells didn't explode, they didn't do the damage. And also the swordfishes in a way got lucky that they never got hit where it actually would have hurt them, like the engine, let's say, or the pilot.
And at the same time, basically all navies had way too low anti-aircraft suits in the early or in the late 1930s and early 40s.
And then when you look at the Swordfish during the Channel Dash, for example, when the German battleships go back to Germany, all of the Swordfishes that were used there got shot down by the Luftwaffe as they were attacking the German convoy. So, you know, we always think about the Bismarck and Taranto, but the operational sort of conditions there allowed the Swordfish to do well. And then you pit it against, you know, a daytime operation, a fleet with air cover, and suddenly, you know, it's not holding up that much anymore. Yeah. So it's a give and take, and you really have to look at it. But to be
fair, I mean, also better torpedo and dive bombers were also shot down by air cover really likely. So it's kind of hard to tell, yeah. But basically, like, I think she was really good for anti-submarine warfare.
Yeah, slow.
Later on, because for that it's really useful, So
if you can stay around the area where a submarine is quite slow, you know, the ability to actually essentially engage the submarine goes up. Anyway, a little bit of an extra question there from the Hansaplast. Can you tell us something about you? Why the passion for planes? Maybe do a day with the biz. I guess he means a vlog or something like this. So we actually have a certain project that is in the works right now. We're conceptualizing it. So
we actually try to figure out what we're gonna do.
Yeah. So we are going to do something on this very soon. We're still sort of, you know, crushing some ideas here. Stay tuned. Norman wants to know, have I joined a small bore rifles club yet? So you know this, of course. I went to Switzerland, visited Block on the range. First time I fired a couple of rifles. I did the M1 Garand, I did the...
So you were virgin with shooting rifles?
Sorry?
So you were virgin with small arms?
I was what?
A virgin with small arms?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, you never had military service.
I didn't. I lucked out because they changed the rules. And then there was the Tika.
What?
Tika, it was like a Canadian rifle built in Switzerland or something. Sorry, it was built in Finland. And it was quite interesting, first time shooting, of course. Car 98, I didn't hit anything. But...
well, I never shot one, so I don't know.
It wasn't a very pleasant experience.
I mean, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
It's a German weapon.
But so my university does have a small bore rifle club, and I'm in contact with them, and we'll see where we go with that. Dev David, I would like to think the US is over glorifying the P-51D as a fighter. How did it compare to the Bf-109K and late G models to the actual Focke-Wulf 990D in an actual one-on-one dogfighting? The thing is, the idea that we have of this one-on-one dogfight in the traditional sense, sort of the romanticized version, doesn't really happen.
Especially not at that point in the war.
No, especially not at that point in the war. You had these incidents, of course, in the memoirs, where it's like, oh, I had this one dogfight with this one guy, we had a couple of passes at each other, and then either I shot him down or he hit me and I got saved or whatever. Most of the time, you didn't see what hit you, and you were just shot down. Performance-wise, I mean, they could tango with the P-51D, but then again, you look at the context of the engagement, the Americans have way more planes out there, the Brits even have more planes out there, the Germans have only very few hit-and-run tactics, pilots that don't really, some pilots that know very, very well what they're doing, and then there's some pilots, or the majority of pilots,
which are at that point not really well trained, because there's not enough fuel,
and
everything else.
I mean, you were lucky if you had, one of these Focke-Wulf 190Ds or 109K, if you had a pilot in there with 10 flight hours, none of them on a high performance machine. That was pretty good training right there for him at this point. So,
also altitude-wise is probably a difference?
Yeah, altitude-wise, yes and no. But I think at later stages in the war, it was low altitude fighting mainly, because the Germans didn't even go up against the bombers anymore.
Okay.
At the very late stages. But yeah, I mean, you really had situations where you had one veteran pilot being followed by 3, 4, 5, 6 trainee pilots, rookie pilots, and he is essentially a Judas goat, leading them to the bomber formation in late 44 and saying, let's go in, one run, attack what you can, and then run away. And when he would land back in the base, maybe 2 of his guys would still be there. So really good machine, pilots can't use them. But like I said, performance-wise, yeah, it could tangle. You know, it's a give and take. Every plane has an advantage over another plane and has a disadvantage. Second question by Dev David, what sparked your interest in military aviation? I've actually answered this before, I think on the last Q&A, and I've also answered it in the podcast with Digital Voices, but we could turn that question to you. What sparked your interest, if you want to take that one?
I also answered this, and I don't have a clear answer to this.
Okay,
Because
there we go.
I assume it was probably Gulf War,
Yeah.
Desert Storm, so, but it's one. There are few, for instance, for heavy metal, I know basically the exact date and the exact place where it happened.
Yeah.
For history and military history,
It just developed, I guess.
it just developed. It's like with computer games, it's also just developed. It was
Yeah.
not. I have played some games and some stuff, but at one point I was like, okay, that's it.
I think that's the case for most people. It's just you progressively get into something.
So some people know, okay, they watched all the time these documentaries and stuff, and this got them hooked. And for me, it's like, I think it was probably Desert Storm. Yeah.
I mean, for me in planes, quick answer. We had a neighbor. He had a plane. I was a young kid. He took me in flying one day, and that was it. You know. Fritz K wants to know. Now that MHV has jumped across the pond, can we expect our favorite chancellor to make a similar journey, hopefully to the Air and Space Museum, so obviously to the United States. So the big dream is obviously there, and I sort of have this idea in my mind for 2020 that I do want to go to the US. However, and you know this, it
costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money.
I basically only did it because Wargaming said,
yeah,
we're gonna pay for this, and you do some stuff, and yeah, that's what made it possible. And then I learned actually that some of my calculations were too high. Mm-hmm. The flight actually I calculated too high, but the cost for food and most other stuff is way higher than I expected actually. I mean, there's way to avoid this, but the thing is like, because I had the discussions on my channels already, and some people say, you can stay at my place and everything. Yeah. The point is then you're dependent, which means that sometimes you need time alone or everything else, and logistics, and also we have a certain age. I mean, you are still rather young. At my age, sleeping at somebody else's place, I usually don't even sleep at somebody else of my best friends' places anymore. Usually when I visit, sometimes I go to a hotel or something, because it kind of feels weird when you're almost 40 and you sleep at the couch at a friend's place. At least because when I was 26 or something, this was not a question. I was always like, okay, I'm searching somebody to sleep there, but I don't know, at a certain point it's kind of weird. So you have to get food all the time. You have to have a hotel or a motel every day.
Transport.
Also, you have, which Shifting pointed actually out. In the United States, you can't go anywhere without a car. Yeah. And you don't have a driver's license yet, I think.
Not yet.
So you have
working on it.
So you need at least either you get the driver's license or you need a second guy who is driving. Yeah. Which, I mean, we could go together or something, or I mean, ideally you get somebody assigned or something. Because in my case, basically Shifting was assigned to me. So by Wargaming, and this worked out great. There's some probably when this comes out, the first road diary will be out as well.
So yeah, it's a big thing, and every time we go on a sort of excursion, or like I wouldn't even call it, it's a business trip really. Yeah. We have certain contingencies, we have certain dates we have to be at a certain place, and every time we do the calculation on the budget, there's things that go above that, below that, and it's a big, massive trip. And for me, for example, I live in the UK usually. Going to Europe, continental Europe, that's theoretically that's fine, but still you have the dates, still have flights can be delayed, you have a stopover somewhere, and there's so many variables that you have to consider. And if I go to the US, the budget would have to be there, and then I would need to sort out the logistics, which is possible. I mean, driving license, I'm working on it and so on, but it's just such, and also going to the US just for one museum makes no sense. So for me, it would literally be a trip of maybe a month where I have to sort out all the museums, have to get all the museums to say, yes, you can come to us, which probably would work out. then find the plane list. Which planes can I do? What can I do with these planes? Because sometimes in some planes I can get in the cockpit, in some planes I can't get in the cockpit. Then there are certain museums that have certain rules about how I use the machines and how I interact with the machine. With other museums are more hands-off.
And some don't answer, some answer late, some immediately, some don't answer after a while. And the thing is, if it goes for 1 month, that's like 30 days.
Yeah.
And basically a hotel costs around 90 to 100 bucks. I think you could get a cheap motel around 50 bucks every time. Okay, let's take 50 times 30, that's 1,500. And then the flight is more or less, I think, between $1,500 to $2,500.
And also that's just a flight to the US, and then in the US I would probably go, from
then
to fly to Ohio, fly to Florida.
So I don't know how much the rental car is and the fuel, because that's probably cheaper than Europe. But then we're already, let's say, 2,000 for the flight.
Yeah.
Then 1,000 for staying. Then you have 3,500, and then he just has breakfast now. He has to have dinner and lunch. Yeah. Okay, let's assume you go to McDonald's or something every time, or Burger King, and so you pay around 10 bucks. But everything else, the restaurants, actually, I was quite shocked that the prices were quite high. I mean, the portions are also larger, but then you have like 20 bucks for food each day, which is the low end. So that's also 600. Yeah. So we are now at 4,600. And in this time, I mean, you can upload to a certain degree. I can preload. I can't edit video footage on my laptop usually, because it takes way too much power and everything. So you can publish anything for a while. I mean, for you have a more relaxed publishing schedule. Yeah. Because I have like
twice a month.
I have 2 videos a week more or less, or sometimes lately also 3 videos a week. Yeah. So that's also, it's pretty intense.
Just to round it up, the plans are there. The thinking is there, the will is there. It's just an immense project.
Yeah, logistical wise.
And we will get it done, but it has to be done in the correct way, because if the trip goes south, it goes south really fast. And then I don't want to be sitting there, having made promises of being like, oh yeah, I'm going to make this, US trip, and then suddenly it just ends in catastrophe.
I mean, we saw this with the dependency, for instance. I landed in Newark and then should go from Newark to Cleveland. Yeah. And immigration took too long. Yeah. So I had to get a new flight. Luckily, I didn't have to pay for that. Yeah. But Chifton had to wait 3 hours more or something. And at this point, for instance, if you take somebody else, like, okay, I will drive you there or something, when you rely somebody else, then this person maybe has to go to work or something else, or a family issue. So you can't be reliant on other people at that point. You need your own.
You need to be self-sufficient. That's just how it is. Okay, Trumpetteer, favorite Wunderwaffe or experimental plane from any or all of the nations in World War II?
Trumpetteer. Hey.
You know him. So, yeah, he's a patron of both of us.
Yeah. He has all the cat memes. Yeah. The best cat memes.
He does. So I
didn't sound very convincing there.
Well, half of his posts are just cats, which is
sometimes it's just a cat, and I'm like, what does this now mean? It's like
I'm sitting there deciphering the cat emotions, just like, what does he mean?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a cat.
Anyway, I kind of, for this answer, I would go maybe with pusher aircraft, because they didn't really get used for obvious reason, but you had the XP-55 Ascender, you have the Kyushu J7W, you have the Saab-21, which later on becomes a jet in Sweden, bringing us full circle to the first question, I think. But I just like them because they're odd and different, but not because they could have been an amazing weapon. There was good reasons why they weren't used in the end. As for Wunderwaffe, I'm not a Wunderwaffle guy. Most of that stuff wouldn't work. And I mean, do you have maybe a tank or something, a tank concept you like, but that didn't really see an application?
So how you define Wunderwaffe is something that was...
I don't know how he defines it.
Yeah, that's the question. I mean,
let's go with experimental.
So with experimental stuff, I usually don't look into experimental stuff at all, because it's always like, yeah, whatever.
It's interesting.
For me, it's only usually interesting when it's saw use in a certain amount of numbers or something else. It's like, yeah, these paper projects and these what ifs, these all are, yeah, it's basically clickbait content. I mean, I also make it to a certain degree. Did I ever make something along those lines? I don't know.
Well, for example, I could make a video about the fact that the US and the Soviet Union experimented with nuclear-powered aircraft, strategic bombers. I could make a video about that. You know, I don't really see a reason for it because it fell flat on its face.
Yeah,
and maybe I'll do it at some point because sometimes I do want to make a video about a experimental thing, but actually present it in a proper sort of manner, not go with the full-on, oh, this could have changed the war, this could have changed everything. But for example, with my choice now of pusher aircraft, these actually had a military application in the First World War, not anymore in the Second World War. So there you go.
I mean, the issue is we lack so much information actually on stuff that was used and in large numbers and like Operation Ichigo or some stuff which is completely forgotten or unknown, which had huge impacts. I mean, Ichigo is insane in that regard, but everyone cares about the mouse. I mean, as I pointed out, I was at Kummersdorf where the mouse was tested, and I think you mentioned the tweet today. I went there. I was at Kummersdorf, the home of the mouse, and many more projects which were way more important. Yeah. Because the thing is, if I don't write mouse, most people don't care. But the thing is, Kummersdorf was back in the 19th century already a very important artillery testing facility and then weapons development facility and everything. A lot of stuff went down there. And we still know very little about the place actually, and later on the Soviets used it as well, and from that time I think we know even less from what I heard when I was talking to the people from the museum there. It's quite an interesting place in many ways nowadays.
Yeah, that's the other thing, I mean, this might be a controversial statement or a surprising statement, but I would argue that especially the operational side of the Luftwaffe is still an understudied aspect.
Everything about the Wehrmacht is operationally understudied because nobody cares about operational history in academic circles. I mean,
some do. But
I mean, I actually also don't care very much about operational history, but then again, I'm not the establishment, and I think it's quite a foundation, because I think Justin also mentioned this. The problem is if you don't do operational history in the academic circles, somebody else will do it. And
then you
usually they don't work as thoroughly, or they might have an agenda, or both.
Maybe, yeah.
It's
right, moving on. Jens B. Do you think that the Luftwaffe rotating pilots and letting them rest between service pilots would have made a big difference? Less combat fatigue, etc., or did they have too few pilots to even have the option to rotate pilots? Big difference? I don't think so. I really don't. The main problem is not that they had too few pilots on paper. Initially, at least, I think the main problem was that they had non-stop action and too many operations in different areas where they could never concentrate their forces. Because if you look at Poland, very easy. The whole Luftwaffe goes in there. Yes, the Polish Air Force fights back. It does really well actually to a degree, but is overpowered. Same thing when, Norway and Denmark is slightly different, but if we go to the Low Countries, again, the Luftwaffe goes in there by force, bam, wipes out the opposing air forces as much as it can, doesn't do as well as a job as it wanted to, which is important to remember as well. Same thing France, just one concentrated bulk going in there, doing its job. Whereas afterwards we have this non-stop sort of, Battle of Britain, there's that disaster in a certain way. Then it gets shifted all the way to the Mediterranean, a lot of the operational units. Then it's the Eastern Front, then units get pulled from the Eastern Front back to Africa, back into the Mediterranean, then hence back. And then the Allies come in ever greater number from the UK. The Americans join in, 1943 sees the first sort of attacks also by the American bombers over Germany. It's just, there was too much going on. So on paper, too few pilots was essentially because there are too many areas where they had to fight. That was essentially the issues. And rotating pilots, I mean, pilots did get breaks, absolutely. And also the squadrons made sure that their pilots could rest as much as they possibly could give them. But there are squadrons and groups and Staffeln who were working themselves to exhaustion, literally, where you have reports of pilots getting out of an aircraft and just fainting because they already flew 5 combat sorties that day. They flew 5 combat sorties the day before, 5 combat sorties, and it's just non-stop. So yes, more pilots would have been helpful, but on paper, the Air Force size wasn't all that small for a long period of time during the Second World War. It's just that they were in too many areas. And you can say all the Allies had the same thing. Like the Brits had to defend Britain and had to make sure that there was a force there. And they had also Southeast Asia, and they would also have Africa. But they could still concentrate their forces much better there. Because the Southeast Asia, the Brits didn't have that many planes and stations.
They also could train in Canada and Australia and everything. Wasn't one of the main issues that the Germans didn't have dedicated transport fleets for the aircraft, and those were basically all the training pilots?
Kampfgruppen zur besonderen Verwendung.
Yeah, so when they lost a lot of those, I think in Stalingrad airlift, a lot of their training capabilities, or trainers and trainer aircraft, well, they were now somewhere between Stalingrad and I don't know where they flew in, from where, so...
especially for the Kampfgruppen zur besonderen Verwendung, these were the up-and-coming bomber pilots, or even Zerstörer pilots to some degree, because they were training on a multi-engine aircraft, which was the Ju-52. The problem is these Kampfgruppen were essentially the trainer Staffeln, so trainer groups. They were also auxiliary bomber units, although not used in that role for the majority of the conflict. They were also used as logistical support, both for goods, for men, and for medical supplies. And they were used in those missions where the Germans dropped paratroopers. So you can see the attrition there from the backup pilots that were supposed to roll out. There was never enough. Anyway, I think we sort of answered that question.
Yeah.
Bill W wants to know, Focke-Wulf 190 and Bf-109 seem to have a much smaller tail sections comparatively to almost all Allied fighters. Why is that so? I actually don't think so. I think they're relatively in proportion. So the 109...
It's generally small.
It's generally small, compact, and yes, the height sort of the vertical stabilizer isn't that high. But for example, in the RAF Museum in Hendon, you have the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the CR-42, and the 109E4, I think it is, or maybe it's an E3, standing in a circle. And you look at them, and the tail sections are, I think, in my eye, in proportion. Obviously, the Allies get bigger planes. P-47, P-51 is bigger than the 109. The Typhoon, the Tempest, these are massive machines. And obviously, the tail section looks bigger at that point. But I think they are relatively in proportion. Did it ever strike you as being...
The thing is, I can't really remember proportions and sizes.
Yeah.
So I mean, you should... you could do the area calculations. Yeah. That's the thing, because also I don't know anything about aerodynamics. Jens Wiener could probably answer this very well, because he's really good at that stuff. I think.
That's true. Next question, Curtis W. Did the Bf-109H really exist? I've seen legions of photographs of various World War II German aircraft, from a wooden mock-up stage right to the field use. I've never seen an obvious or verified photo of the Bf-109H series. Yes, it did exist, very small numbers produced. They tested them, I think as also as a recon aircraft, then later on. Didn't go very far, didn't work out as they wanted to, and they had different priorities at that point. So this was 1944 when they started testing these. So yeah, they did exist, small numbers. All right, so that is it for today, guys. Thank you very much for submitting questions.
That's it already?
Yeah, that's it already. Well, I think we've actually, for the amount of questions we had, we talked quite a lot.
Could be, I mean, we like to talk, so it's not pretty surprising.
I'm wondering what the timestamp is that we're on at the moment. So yeah, thanks Bernard for joining in, lending your expertise.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, obviously. The projects that we're working on will be announced very shortly. So please make sure you subscribe to his channel with the bell, so you actually get notification when he puts out a video.
Actually, to my second channel as well. Actually, that might be more important.
Second channel as well.
The military is really not visualized.
Yeah. And then obviously on my channel, if you are subscribed, if you aren't yet subscribed, make sure you also press that bell button, because then you actually get notifications from YouTube that we put out videos, because for some reason YouTube decided not to tell you guys, even if you're subscribed, that a new video is out. Anyway, thanks very much for your support, and as always, have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.
Thank you for watching, and see you next time.